is, of course, about EN81-70, with a particular direction towards displays. EN81-70 is a comprehensive document that details much about accessibility for lifts. So I hope to guide you through all the different aspects with obviously the display's focus. Okay, so to begin, EN81-70, this defines the minimum requirements for safe independent access and use of elevators by all passengers, and it includes many things that take into account people that have disabilities or aren't as abled in terms of being able to access the elevator. It provides guidelines on how to best improve accessibility within the elevator cars and on the different landings. This standard then, as I said before, allows people to reduce, with reduced mobility, people that may be having pushchairs or wheelchairs, walking aids, etc., or other disabilities, to enter the elevator cabins easily and safely and operate the elevators without any limitations. Specific requirements on EN81-70 before have seen the standard updated in May 2018 with the EN81-70-2018 code. This was due to be to supersede the previous 2003-2004 standards. To my knowledge, I don't think that's gone ahead so far, much due to the harmonization issues related to the SEN interpretations, which has impacted many of the other EN81 standards. The EN81-70 code should be seen as the higher level of safety though, so you'll see that many people still use this as the standard to go to for accessibility. Another thing that should be probably noted is that EN81-70 doesn't designate who the standard should be used by. This is determined by the National Building Regulations Directive, but it should be used often as reference for accessibility. It's understood by many that you should have at least one passenger lift within the building, although some might see that as being discriminatory in its own purposes. You should enable almost every passenger to be able to access any lift, but I'll let you decide how that happens within your buildings. Okay, so what were the main changes since the last standard? I've highlighted many of the changes that have come across here. I won't go into too much detail as they cover the standard in general. So things like adding addition of 2 more lift car types, increasing door widths, improving the design and arrangement of indicators and stuff. So I'll leave that there just for a second for you to quickly skip through, but the main focus, as I said, for this presentation will be looking at looking at the changes to car signals, but also the specific design requirements that you should pay attention to. So what do those look like? There's been some additions in general to control devices that may be used to activate temporary functions. There's been quite a big emphasis on destination control systems. As you saw, the other code updates were back in 2003 and 2004, and since then technology has advanced. People are using touchscreens more than ever, so the standard needed to be revised to reflect those progressions in technology. So there's a couple of bits there that we will cover. But additionally, we'll also have to take into account the control devices, since destination control systems and touchscreens are now being used, and what impact that has. So I'm quite a graphical person. I like to see things in pictures rather than words. So I've tried to best indicate this in my slides. So for the first one, you'll see here is the landing controls and signals, which I've detailed out the requirements that are set out within the code. So to run you through some of the things that you should consider when trying to go towards this code. The illuminated signals for direction of travel, which will be arrows on the displays, need to be placed above or adjacent to the landing doors. The indicator arrows should be positioned between around 1800 millimeters to 2500 millimeters above the finished floor level. And particular attention should be placed to the viewing angle that's present within the displays. You should have a 140-degree viewing angle on this horizontal plane and a 70-degree vertical down plane angle when you're looking directly on. The height of the arrows as well should also be considered, especially when you're designing your layouts, and that should be a 40 millimeter height minimum. Shouldn't go below that. Something to be considered of when the layouts are being designed. For single lift cars, the indicator arrows can be placed inside the car rather than outside the car. These need to be placed at a height of 1600 millimeters to 2000 millimeters, and shall be clearly visible from the landing when the doors are open. So if you have any single lifts, just note that you don't always have to have the indicators on the outside, although my preference would be to have them there. It's obviously much easier for passengers coming in or out to understand where the floor position is and the direction of travel. When a car call has been made, the selected floor direction of travel and allocated lift shall be confirmed with a visible signal. You'll all be used to seeing these hall lanterns that sort of light up when the floor selection has been chosen and the elevator has been designated. The visible signal should be placed near the input device, so usually the LOP for the destination call. Lift assignment characters on the display screens shall be at least 25 millimeters high, which is obviously different to the inside of the car. After operation of the accessibility button, the visible signal shall be displayed for the duration of the associated voice announcement. We'll go through a bit more about what the accessibility button operation is later. Also to note that there should be an audible signal accompanying the lighting of the arrows. Specifically in the car, there should be a sound for going up, which is usually like a pinging noise or a gong, and 2 sounds for down. Looking at the car controls, very similar measurements, but do take note, slightly different. A position signal shall be located within or above the car operating panel in the center line between 1600 millimeters and 1800 millimeters from the finished floor. The height of the numbers can be between 30 millimeters and 60 millimeters. So also bear that in mind, that there is a difference in the height of the numbers compared to the landings. And additional indicators may also be located elsewhere in the cabin. So as long as you have your position indicator there in the COP, you can also place one above the car door or on the second operating car panel. When the car stops in at least one of the official, when the car stops at one of the landings, an announcement of that floor should be made in one of the official languages. So also one to bear in mind. The induction loop must also accompany this and should be provided for hearing assistance of alarm systems, but also as well as floor announcements. If provided, then a sign for indicating the induction loop is present should also be included. So you'll see that there's the blue icon with the ear there, which is the standard sign for induction loops. So that's also one to bear in mind. These obviously help people with hearing aids that might have trouble hearing the announcements. So that summarizes most of the features there for your in-car and landing panels. We'll go a bit more into touch screens in a moment, but I just wanted to highlight some of the technical points when you are deciding which displays to purchase or to specify. So in my experience, some of the key points here are the MTBF, so it's mean time before failure. In displays, this is a measure of time before the display reaches 50% brightness. So generally, I would say a minimum of 20K hours would be suggested. Bear in mind, though, that many displays out there at the moment have the ability to have an eco mode, so when the elevator isn't running, it will either dim its brightness or turn off, as long as there's no one in the car. Additionally, you would have heard before that we said that the viewing angle must be taken into account. So please do pay attention to that when you're looking to spec or buy a display, to make sure that it meets the right viewing angles required so that you can view it from anywhere within the car. If you're interested in displaying some high quality video, depending on size, resolution is another one. Many people will be looking at the sort of 180p HD screens, but if you're going for the cheaper screens that are required for sort of pictures, you won't quite hit those qualities. So that's also something to be considered. The elevator obviously has different operating temperatures depending on where it's placed in the world, but typically we sort of range our displays around the 0 degrees Celsius to 50 Celsius operating temperature mark. So do bear that in mind, especially if you're trying to spec into high climates that it could be quite high. And also the network interface, so being able to show lift status information or position information. Make sure that when you're speccing these screens that they have the ability to get that information freely. Protocols, as everyone knows, aren't often shared by many of the OEMs, so it can be difficult to get the correct protocols. And trust me, it's probably one of the more troublesome areas of these displays. So what does this all look like in practice in terms of what will your final product look like? There's a range of displays that can be chosen. So dot matrix displays, which everyone should be familiar with. They're on railways and elevators and have been typically used for at least the past 20 years. These are, however, starting to go a little bit more out of fashion as the TFT picture screens, multimedia screens all become much cheaper and accessible. So looking at the picture displays, for example, AVIRE has the C1L and PSP range, which basically just shows static images or flipping images if you wanted to show a sequence of images, but also has on there the position indicator and status messages for the elevator. Also, you probably were seeing some sort of high-end buildings, the stretch displays. We call ours the panorama stretch display. These are often shown in landings, but you can also see them inside the lift cars. These are usually quite heavy-duty bits of material that can show plenty of videos, RSS feeds, weather information, and keep the passengers a lot more engaged. It also has the ability to show more than one lift information on it. So sometimes you'd have a larger screen there showing the lift status or lift position of 2 or 3 elevators, depending on what is spec'd. We're inside the car. What does this look like? We're seeing the movement a lot towards multimedia screens with the ability to schedule advertising and try and attain a return on investment. It's also providing building owners a much better chance to engage with their users, the ability to give them messages, tell them when the elevator might be down or go through a service, and allows building owners and many other users to attain a different aesthetic appeal to their building. So again, more and more as we see these things becoming more available and cheaper, that people are starting to spec these in. Again, to note with these multimedia displays is networking, not only in terms of getting protocol information, but also networking so that it can connect to the internet is also one to take note of. It can become quite complicated if you haven't got the right people helping you. So just to take note. These displays, as you can see at the bottom, our IS2LX range from 10.4 to 21.5 inch. We actually have done displays that go up to 55 inch. And I'm seeing that a lot more common in the marketplace these days as people look to become more extravagant and show off their buildings. Now, paying more attention towards the touch screen. A lot of customers that we've seen think that once you have a touch screen, it's fairly simple going and sort of almost neglect some of the finer aspects that you have to pay attention to. So for example, Having a touchscreen on the COP is obviously excellent, but you need to make sure that you have a DDA keypad below that. You also note that there's certain height restrictions on where the buttons need to be. So the highest button can be 1200 millimeters, but you also notice that the position indicator is 1600 millimeters to 1800 millimeters. So you need a fairly large display to be able to reach to the top there. And you'd also need to make sure that the position indicator is always located at the top. What I usually ask people to do is probably just to purchase maybe a picture display for your position indicator that can link into your touchscreen display. Also, looking at the keypad, the DDA keypad there, you need to make sure that it meets the specified requirements of distance. So the width can be no greater than 120 millimeters and the height no greater than 160 millimeters. Sort of finer details that can often, not on purpose, but just be neglected. The use of an accessibility button is also important in these scenarios. So make sure that you have the correct accessibility button, but also that the DDA keypad and accessibility button and also the panel touch display itself can all interact with each other. You can't often just buy these parts separately and hope they work together. Also make sure that for your touchscreens that the button sizes are correct. They need to have a certain width between them. They need to be a certain size. The characters on there need to be a certain size. And these are also detailed here on this slide with the picture graphic that I created. The LRV value should also be taken into account, which shows the difference in dark and light materials. This is all spec'd with an EN81-70. So again, I like the use of a touchscreen, but once you have to go through all the rigmarole of putting all the extra keypads, the accessibility buttons, ensuring that all the things are all sized properly, creating the layouts, it does become quite the project. But of course, yes, I have to say they look excellent once they're installed. At the beginning, I also said that there's been a rise in destination control. And with destination control, people don't seem to just be happy with keypads. They want to use touchscreens. It makes it look pretty cool, enhances the aesthetics of the building. So there's also been an input of detail for this. So to bear in mind, I mean, we'll go into a bit more detail in terms of graphic in a second, but you must bear in mind that the same keypads and accessibility buttons should also be present. Also, one I picked up whilst rereading this version of the standard was the ability to use additional controls. I thought this was quite topical as obviously COVID-19 has gone through the countries and now that people are less inclined to touch buttons or touch any surfaces that might have been touched by other people. So the use of a magnetic chip card or mobile phone has been allowed within this standard to temporarily activate personalized lift and signal functions. So in terms of your EN81-70, as long as the buttons are there, in my perspective, you can still use all of these other devices to control the cars. Specifically for the destination control platform, you'll see that many OEMs such as Kony and Schindler have quite decent destination control systems where they've implemented nice touchscreens with integrated accessibility buttons. But there are a few things to consider when implementing this into your application. Again, things like using the correct height of character heights, having the right distances between the active buttons, ensuring that the right active buttons are actually there. We need to make sure as well that the height of the screen is a minimum of 850 millimeters and that there's a maximum of 1,100 millimeters from the finished floor. Of course, you can buy a lot of these destination controls stands as a standard at this stage, and I would probably implore you to do that to avoid all the rigmarole of trying to assemble many components and get them to the right DDA compliance. There are some functions that have been added in terms of when these car calls are made, in terms of increasing door dwell time, if there is an accessibility button being pressed, and also that if the accessibility button is pressed, that there's floor announcements and indication of what the user should do next for when they're trying to select the lift or call the lift. The destination control also requires that there's clear markings on your elevators to make sure that the right one is selected and shown illuminated when it's been pressed and pushed forward. Next slide. So the touchscreen, so important features as we sort of gone through already, is to ensure that they are compliant to the code. So size of the floor selection, the luminescence requirements to make sure that the display is bright enough, distance between buttons, symbols, and ensure that there's feedback. There's actually been quite a few happenings in technology where you can get some quite good haptic feedback from your touch screens. I've also seen displays that do these sort of touchless haptic feedbacks using sound waves, which look pretty cool. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they develop. But you should also ensure that there is some feedback given from when you press the button. So things like lighting the button up, or there's an audible signal, so that it's very clear to people that are using these systems what is happening with the elevator and what they have pressed. And of course, you need to, as I said before, you need to make sure that the DDA keypad is accessible to work with the different systems. So you'll see here, there's a couple of examples. We have our PanaTouch system that we have there, but for the destination control, I pulled out Kearney's destination control example, which I think is a pretty neat product and shows it off quite well. Something to consider. At Interlift this year, I was amazed by the amount of what people were calling smart mirrors or smart displays, where you have a display sat behind a mirror. And of course, the mirrors is sat off on the back walls to ensure that people that are on wheelchairs or pushchairs that can't sort of turn around within the elevator can reverse out and see where they're reversing. So one thing to bear in mind, which I don't think has been addressed, is that these displays could impair the vision of the person trying to wheel themselves out or use the mirror for use. So when you're installing this, I've seen installations where they have cameras that sort of will see if someone's in there and then turn it on, or that link to the door controller, and when the door controller is open, that the display will stay off until it shuts and then it will come on. So just to bear that in mind, I don't think many people have taken that into consideration with the whole HIPLA of this looks like such a cool solution, but practically we need to make sure that the actual use is there for what it needs to be. Another thing to consider, and this is a bit outside of EN81-70. So AVIRE sells displays all over the world, so it's up to us to stay updated with the different codes. And I think one code to note is the A17.1-2019. So this is the US version of the code. And what they've recently introduced is the ability to have a two-way messaging system for inside the car. This includes a one-way video feed so that the operator can see what's going on inside the car. Now, this is particularly useful for people that might have hearing or speech disabilities that can't communicate just using your regular alarm phone, emergency alarm phone. So it includes the ability to press either yes or no to different questions that are called in by the call center or the person attending the call. But it also allows for registration for the person that's obviously for the call center to assess what the situation is in the car. Everyone will know that there's been regular occurrences where someone will press an alarm call and it was by accident, or they'll leave the elevator and that will cause someone to go there to check if someone is trapped or if someone's passed out or something like that. So the ability to see inside the car is one which I think is very important, so you can assess the situation properly, but also the ability to answer yes and no is also important. So we've implemented a system where that's possible. Our US companies, Rath and Janus, who are part of the AVIRE brand, we've called the system SmartView. So that SmartView system will live with the call center, and inside the elevator car, as I said previously, there will be a one-way video feed that allows the caller to see what's going on inside, but also on the screen, as I've shown there, the ability to type a question and get a yes or no answer from the track passenger. Something definitely to consider. I've seen it starting to sort of pop up in other countries within the EU, and I definitely think this is probably the way forward for safety provision going forward. So although I haven't heard it, I'd expect that this is probably going to be implemented somewhere within the next 10 to 15 years. It just, to me, makes sense. And that's all I really had to discuss about EN81-70. It was quite a brief look into what the standard actually shows. And I look forward to hearing some of your questions.
Thank you, Aaron. That was great. I have some questions here. So I will kick those off. So a question here saying, are direction arrows compulsory for single lifts?
So direction arrows are compulsory for single lifts inside the lift car, not outside the lift car. Of course, as I said before, I think it's way more beneficial to have them on the landings as well. Gives a lot more feedback. So yes.
Okay. A question here saying, what is haptic feedback?
So so I'm sure most of you have like an iPhone or something. So when you press on your iPhone button, there's not actually a button, is there? And it's then, what it'll do is it'll give you a haptic feedback, which is like a vibration. So it gives the indication that something has been pressed. That's pretty much what a haptic feedback is, like a little vibration. The sort of touchless haptic feedbacks that I came across before, they're quite expensive at the moment, so probably not something that we're looking to implement for the time being, unless someone wants to pay a hefty price. But these are quite cool things that you can pretty much just, you'd have a screen in the background, then you would place your hand over the screen and you'll get some vibrations in the air that will make it feel like you're pressing a button.
Yeah. Makes you understand that something's happened. You've not just pressed it.
Exactly.
Great. What is the reasoning behind the maximum indicator height of 60 millimeters inside the lift car?
I guess it's to so that wherever you're standing within the lift car, to have it visible. It's important to give feedback to people within the lift car of what is happening, whether it's moving up or down, or what position they're on for multiple reasons. It makes people probably feel a bit calmer, the fact that they know where they are and what's happening with the lift. But also in a practical term, if you're at the back of the lift and there's plenty of people there, you want to be able to have a clear visible indication of where that car is going and when to get off.
Yeah, imagine it stops too many wasted journeys going the wrong way. Have you experienced any challenges in demonstrating your products meeting the LRV contrast requirements in terms of real-world testing methods?
I've never come up against any challenges for displays. I think it probably is a bit more relevant when you're looking at types of COP manufacture for different metals and finishes. What they do is that, I think I showed, if I quickly go through my slides, maybe I can find it. There's a scale. This scale here on the right hand side, which will show the different brightnesses and darknesses, and they basically have a bit of paper which they put up against it and they mark it. I think normally you're looking to be sort of above the 30% mark, but no, for our displays, unless it's a display that's been installed for a lot of years, or it's got a high use in, and the brightness is sort of dulled quite a lot, it's fairly easy. I've never really come across that as a problem.
Thank you. What's this one? So the horizontal COP has to be the same shape as shown in the standard EN81-70, being shown that there must be a 10 centimeter between the wall. Yes,
the horizontal COP has to be the same shape shown in the standard as EN81-70. It doesn't so much say much about the shape, but it does indicate in terms of how far away from the wall it should be, as I think you've mentioned there. I haven't really come across many of the COP designs that go against the shape, as people tend just to follow what the standard is. I'd be interested in seeing and asking a bit more about that question after.
Okay. Regarding the smart mirror, or the magic mirror, does AVIRE have that product available?
So believe it or not, the smart mirror isn't actually so smart. It's just a display with a two-way mirror. So yes, we can provide that. We can source the mirror, and we have obviously big enough screens that can do that. It's not something that we've pushed in recent time, but I have been getting many more requests about it. So yeah, happy to work with you on that. I have a few suppliers that we can do the mirror with, and also we have the displays.
Is it possible to get touchscreens that create some sort of tactile interface, raised elements pushing out of the screen, for example?
So I have actually seen touchscreens that have, it's almost like a bubble underneath the screen, and it does raise out and create a tactile interface. I mean, the main problem with those is that they're static. So when you're creating layouts, I mean, you want to be able to change the layouts in these screens. So you have to take that into mind. I've also seen people get an overlay of sort of braille that they put over the screens. So when they're pressing on the active push parts, you can still feel the braille and the screen is interfaced. But that's all I've had from there. There's also a question here on, so yeah, in terms of touchscreens, that's sort of my answer. I think John Reynolds has also asked about, can it be 60 millimeters? I think that's in relation to that. Can it be greater than 60 millimeters? I think that's in relation to the arrow height. Yes, it could be as big as you want. Obviously, I think the bigger the better, but you want it to look good.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's just a minimum, How would you anticipate a change in lift maintenance companies being managed should the two-way SmartView system be fitted?
How would you anticipate the change in lift companies being managed? Okay, so there's a couple of ways, I think, in answering this. One, in terms of the maintenance company actually providing the call center functionality. In many other countries, Germany, Spain, in America, the call centers are much more prevalent in terms of these are places that will monitor lifts and alarm calls. In the UK, I haven't seen it as much. It seems to be a lot more focused on the lift maintenance company. So the way that I'd anticipate that being fixed is that you'll probably see people starting to create call centers. It seems like a good business model to get into if there's demand. So it's definitely something to add to the repertoire. I guess the second part of that question could be looking at how the system is fitted. To get video feed, you usually need to have an extra twisted pair or a VDSL connection or an Ethernet connection that allows for data to be transmitted from the car up into to whatever cloud platform you have, which can be quite labor intensive. And we're actually seeing quite a lot of pushback from a lot of the maintenance companies in the US in terms of this being made active. But I think it's down to the suppliers to really help alongside the maintenance companies to ensure that this solution is implemented in the correct way and that they're guided every step of the way. It's very similar to our display systems in terms of the data that we need to transmit from the lift car up into our cloud platform. So in terms of system architecture, it's very similar, if not the same. So yeah, I'd say working very closely with the suppliers is the main key there.
Perfect. Right. A question here: is the type of mirror glass for the mirror displays regulated? Here they've put as part of I don't know if that's the EN81-70 or if that's a typo. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think it is regulated. I think the vandal-proof regulation is actually in a different regulation, isn't it? It's EN81-80 or something. I would have to double check. But when I was reading through the EN81-70 regulation, there was no reference to vandal proof in the mirror glass.
Okay. Is the LRV variance 30% in the 2018 revision? There was mention of it becoming significantly higher due to pressure from organisations supporting the site.
From what I read, it was 30%. Of course, you'd make me double think myself now, so I'd have to double check. There is a table, I think it's table 2, that goes through the different references of what the LRV should be. Hold on, I think I might actually have the standard here. Do you want to ask the next question? I'll quickly look to see what it says. Yeah,
absolutely. So just, I just quickly check myself. The lift standards for vandal resistant lift components is EN81-70. If anyone wants to go and have a look at that. So, there is an article about vandal resistance on our website, if that's helpful.
So going back to that last question about the LRV, it is 30%. People recommend it to be 60%, but the minimum it states is 30%.
Yes, perfect. Okay, right. A little bit more about touchless buttons here, and obviously COVID-19 and that being top of people's minds right now. Obviously we're not a button manufacturer, so we probably are not going to be coming out with any touchless buttons, as far as I know.
Actually, yes, we have been looking at some touchless button solutions.
Of course.
So as a part of, I think, every business that's gone through the COVID-19 scenario, we're looking at ways to innovate to, one, the primary focus, help people with elevators and stay, safe in terms of infection. So touchless buttons is obviously one of the main aspects. We're developing something at the moment. We hope to have it ready sooner rather than later, I'm hoping, so that we can really start giving people the solution that they need. I have seen products in the market that will have a sort of sensor that will call the elevator, so it's particularly in the LOP, and that will just use a motion sensor that will be able to call the elevator up or down. Our solution that we're developing allows you to pretty much from the air type in which number you have and then have it provide some assistance in terms of feedback. So just on topic, other COVID things that we're looking at applying are sort of people counting and limiting people from coming into a lift. Obviously social distancing is a large thing, so we're creating a system that will allow that to happen and make sure that you don't have too many people in your lifts. Of course, if you want to hear more about that solution, I'm more than happy to take questions. My contact details are obviously on the screen now, so please do get in contact.
I didn't know that, I'd just forgotten. Right, and I think we've got time for one more question. There's quite a few more questions that we will try and get back to people on afterwards. Aaron, do you want to choose the last question?
So someone's asked here, is there any mention of frequency of cleaning lifts and car buttons in the latest legislation? Also, is there any mention of what material the push buttons should be made from in the lift car and the landing cobble buttons? Okay, so in EN81-70 in particular, there isn't any mention about cleaning. And I don't think there's any mention in terms of the actual material. It's more in relation to the LRV value. But obviously very topical, the fact that people will be cleaning their COPs and LOPs more often with the current virus. I would just pay attention to what type of cleaning material you use, because some of them could be quite corrosive if used quite a lot. But there's also other manufacturers that do COPs that are using different types of material that don't hold bacteria as long as others. So I know that Dewhurst is one of those, so perhaps have a look on their website. It's definitely worth investing in. We've also seen people put it's almost like a plastic screen that they will put on top of the COP, and it will just drop down, and they can replace that over time, which I think is probably almost a better solution, because it allows you not to, disturb the metal surfaces on your elevators, but also allows you the ability to give it a proper clean, since you will be just changing the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to remind buildings not to just spray whatever they want on the COP. As Aaron said, I've seen some interesting results from that.
Seen some crazy stuff. People are being very inventive. I saw something on LinkedIn the other day where they had this sort of soft ball that they've basically duct taped to the wall, and it has a whole bunch of toothpicks. And the toothpicks, you're meant to take a toothpick and press the button with the toothpick rather than touching yourself. So it'd be interesting to see the crazy things that people come up with.
It is, it definitely is. Right, I think that's all we have time for today. Please do get in touch if we have, we'll try and get back to you if we haven't answered your question. If you have any more, please email myself or Aaron. You've got both our email addresses, and thank you very much for joining. I hope you all have a great day. All right, bye.
Bye, everyone.